And here. Okay, Parshas Korach. So Parshas Korach, this whole story of Korach is one of those complex, hard to understand, multi-layered stories in the Torah. Was Korach a good guy or a bad guy? It's not clear at all. I mean, from the simple reading of the story, it seems clear Korach was a bad guy. What do you mean? He argued against Moshe Rabbeinu. He created one of the tragic stories of Tanakh, of the Chumash, ultimately resulting in the death of Korach and his entire Ada. So anyone who could fight against Moshe Rabbeinu, Hashem's, and Aaron HaKohen, which was his real fight, was against Aaron HaKohen because he wanted to be the Kohen Gadol, which we'll talk about momentarily. So seemingly Korach is a bad guy. But if we look a little bit deeper into the story, and especially if we see the story from the lenses of the great Hasidic masters who give us a more mystical, Kabbalistic understanding of the stories behind the superficial, Korach, in fact, was actually a huge tzaddik. And which is so hard to understand. How could a huge tzaddik have a fight with Moshe Rabbeinu, rebel against Moshe Rabbeinu? It's so, again, it's the story itself is difficult to sort of place. How do we view this entire story? In fact, the Arizal says, and the Arizal is a pretty lofty spiritual Kabbalistic source, that La'asi Lavai, Korach is going to be the Kohen Gadol. That's the godless of Korach. So it's not clear. Korach, good guy, bad guy. How do we understand the story? Obviously, if Korach is going to be the Kohen Gadol, La'asi Lavai, according to the Arizal, then there's more than just the superficial understanding. So, because on one hand, I mean, this created a tragic machlekes, tragic death. We see it's one of the few places in the Torah we see Moshe Rabbeinu's emotions. That Moshe Rabbeinu gets angry. That the Torah tells us here at this parsha, and he tells Hashem, don't accept anything from them. Don't even accept their chelik in the communal korban tamid. Moshe Rabbeinu, and it says v'yichar Moshe. Moshe gets angry and upset. We see Moshe Rabbeinu's emotions here. And not only that, but Pirkei Avos tells us that Pirkei Avos in Perek Hey tells us that gives us this example. What it says, machlekes l'shem shemayim, says Pirkei Avos, machlekes that's l'shem shemayim seifa lihiskayim, will endure in the end. And what's an example of that? The machlekes of Hillel and Shammai, Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai, who fought in concepts in halacha. In Piskei Dinim of halacha, should something be mutar, something be aser, etc. That's a machlekes l'shem shemayim. A machlekes she'ena l'shem shemayim, a machlekes that's not l'shem shemayim, ein seifa lihiskayim, it will not endure. And what's an example of that? Korach ve'dasai, the machlekes of Korach. So Pirkei Avos seems to clearly tell us it's a machlekes that's not l'shem shemayim. But again, if that's the case, then why is it that the Chazal, not even have to go to the Kabbalah, the Chazal tell us that Korach was Pikei Chaya, that Korach was brilliant. The Arizal tells us he was a tzaddik, Ad Kedei Kach will be the Kohen Gadol La'asi Lavai. And look who followed Korach. Look who Korach's followers were. The Torah itself describes them. Nasiya Eda, Kriya Moyed, Anshe Shem. These were the heads of the Sanhedrin, the spiritual leaders of Klal Yisrael, the great tzaddikim, Anshe Shem, renowned men, renowned for their spiritual godless. These were the ones who followed Korach. So obviously Korach wasn't just Stam, a rabble rouser making problems like Dasan and Aviram. Korach clearly was on a lofty spiritual madrega if he had all of these followers. There's a fascinating story, just to add to the complexity. Come on in. The fascinating story from the Yismach Moshe. The Yismach Moshe was the great-grandfather of the first Satmar Rebbe. So he's like sort of the progenitor of Satmar Chassidus, Yismach Moshe. And there's a story with him and his son, the Yitav Lev, the grandfather of the first Rebbe. And there's a conversation that takes place between them. And in this conversation, the Yismach Moshe recalls several of his previous incarnations, Gilgulim, that he was reincarnated multiple times. And he seemed, unlike most of us, he seemed to remember his previous incarnations, which is fascinating. And he says that he tells his son that he was alive during he remembers the machlekes of Korach and Moshe, and that he was sitting on the sidelines. Oh, so his son asked him, whose side did you take? Did you take Korach's or Moshe? And he said, I wasn't sure which side to take. And so I sat on the sidelines, like the vast majority of Jews, to see which one would win, which one would be victorious, and that's the one I would follow. Which it seems like a lot of Jews. And he continues and he tells his son, because his son asks him, how could that be? How could you not know which side to take versus Moshe versus Korach? Wasn't it obvious? And he says, it wasn't obvious. There's a reason why. The 250 men were all the heads of the Sanhedrin. He said all of the heads of the Sanhedrin, all the spiritual leaders followed Korach. And it was the regular Jews. Moshe had a group of just the regular Jews who were behind him. Korach had all the spiritual leaders behind him. And the vast majority of us, of Jews, sat on the sidelines, not getting involved, waiting to see who won. And so it wasn't so obvious. He said, if you would have realized Korach's greatness and spirituality, you would have realized it wasn't so simple. So that's from the Yismach Moshe. I mean, fascinating story. And he writes there that I think that some of the afflictions that he went through in his life were because of payback, that he didn't make the right choice then, that he stood on the sidelines, that was something negative. He took that as a negative, that he was on the sidelines. But the point is, from that story, it wasn't so simple who to follow. Which parallels with what the Arizal says, that Korach's going to be the Kohen Gadol Asi Lavai. So clear, and the fact that the Anshi Shem, the Kriya Eda, the Nasiya Eda, the Kriya Moed, the heads of the Sanhedrin followed Korach. So clearly, the story is not so simple as it appears on a superficial level, that you just have good guy, bad guy. I once saw somewhere, I can't even remember where I saw it, that anyone whose name is mentioned in Tanakh, or maybe it was the Chumash, anyone whose name is mentioned in the Chumash are polar extremes, either tremendously righteous or tremendously the opposite, wicked. And there's very few gray characters in the Torah, very few gray personalities. I think maybe Lot is one of them, who's sort of a gray personality. It's hard to tell where does he fall on this spectrum of Tov and Ra. And Korach is clearly one of these, at least on a superficial level, hard to figure out. But again, when we look a little bit deeper, clearly Korach has tremendous greatness to him. So if that's the case, if Korach was this great tzaddik, what was this machlekes about? And why does Pirkei Avos call it a machlekes she'ena l'shem shemayim? You seem to have contradictions in Torah itself. It was Korach good guy, bad guy? Was it l'shem shemayim, or is he going to be the Kohen Gadol Asi Lavai? How do we understand this machlekes? So I'm going to give one perspective. There's many different explanations of this, but I just want to take one sort of approach, and this is sort of an amalgamation from different Svarim, and we'll see if it makes sense or not. One of the also things that I've always at least noted is that the Lubavitch Rebbe's yahrzeit always falls out near Parshas Korach. This week as well, the Rebbe's yahrzeit is Sunday. So it's a day after Parshas Korach, and it usually falls out either in the Parsha of Korach or B'smichas the Parshas Korach. So obviously, as we always talk about, anytime you have a certain day that falls out in a certain Parsha, especially the yahrzeit of a tzaddik, there's obviously an intrinsic connection to the tzaddik and that Parsha as well. And I always wondered about that, because the Rebbe was the ultimate uniter of Klal Yisrael, and Korach seems to be a divider of Klal Yisrael. So how could the Rebbe's yahrzeit always fall out the smichas to Parshas Korach? So, okay. So the Chassam Sefer and other Sforim point out that Aaron HaKohen was appointed to be the Kohen Gadol right after the Chet HaEgel. And a lot of the commentators talk about this. Why is that? Because Aaron HaKohen clearly had a chelik in the Chet Egel. Now, it wasn't intentional. Obviously, he was trying to do whatever he could to spare Klal Yisrael. We all know the story of Chet Egel. I have to go in, repeating the story of the sin of the golden calf and Aaron's involvement there. But clearly, Aaron was the one who collected the gold, threw it into the fire. It came out a calf. And again, Aaron had his reasons. He was trying to delay Klal Yisrael and wait. He believed Moshe Rabbeinu would come back down, and then they would all have regret for what they were doing. So he was trying to delay them, etc. Bottom line is he had a chelik in it, albeit accidental, not intentional, and his intentions were good. But the bottom line is Aaron HaKohen had a chelik in it. Ad kedei kach, there's an opinion that the reason why the Parah Aduma was given to Elazar, his son, to be the one who ran the Parah Aduma, and not Aaron, was because Aaron's hishtatfus in the Chet Egel. He couldn't even take part in the Parah Aduma. And in fact, there's an opinion that when Korach saw that, the Chazal say, what caused Korach to all of a sudden now rise up against Aaron HaKohen was when he saw that Aaron couldn't take part in the Parah Aduma because of his role in the Chet Egel. So this is what Korach said: if he can't take part in the Parah Aduma, how could he be the Kohen Gadol? How could he lead our nation? So obviously that according to that opinion, the Torah is not written in order. The mitzvah of the Parah Aduma was given before this whole story because that's what motivated Korach ve'idasai. So the Chassam Sefer asks the question, and many other commentaries ask this question as well. We actually touched upon it a few weeks ago in a shiur. We know that on Yom Kippur, the Kohen Gadol doesn't wear gold into the Kodesh HaKadoshim because Ein Keteger Nasas Neger. Gold was a prosecuting force, right? Will act as a prosecuting force against Klal Yisrael on our holiest day of Yom Kippur when we need defense, because we gave our gold to the Chet Egel. So in order that gold, which should not become Ein Keteger, something that's a prosecuting force, Ein Keteger Nasne, cannot become a defense of Klal Yisrael. So the Kohen Gadol, who's acting as the defense attorney on behalf of all of Klal Yisrael in Yom Kippur, doesn't wear gold in the Kodesh HaKadoshim. So, but if that's the case, why don't we say the same thing about Aaron HaKohen? Aaron HaKohen took part in the Chet Egel, yet he was the Kohen Gadol. Why don't we say the same thing, just like we do by the Parah Aduma? That Aaron cannot be the Kohen Gadol because Ein Keteger Nasas Neger. That the Kohen Gadol has to be an absolute pure tzaddik. Shaloi toyim tam chet, that didn't even taste the taste of sin. And this was Korach's time. This was Korach's taina, Korach ve'edasai, who Korach and his Ada, the heads of the Sanhedrin, the Anshi Shem, the Kriya Ada, the Kriya Moed, the Nasiya Ada, these great tzaddikim, these were all pure tzaddikim. And they felt exactly what Korach is saying. And this is what Korach says. That this entire, the Kol Ada Kulam Kadeshim. He's saying we are all Kadeshim. We're all perfect tzaddikim. That's who should lead Klal Yisrael. That's who should be the leader. How could Aaron HaKohen be the leader when he took part in the Chet Egel? This was their complaint. And this is why the great tzaddikim all followed Korach. Because it made sense that the leader of Klal Yisrael should be the Kohen Gadol, the one who acts on their defense, should be a perfect tzaddik that never even tasted sin, that never came close to sin. And this was Korach's taina. He was coming from a place of righteousness. And they all felt that. There's a fascinating Gemara in Masechtas Avodah Zarah that says the entire episode of the Chet Egel, as terrible and as tragic as it was, clearly one of the tragic episodes for Klal Yisrael in the post Matan Torah experience. And yet the Gemara says there was a benefit that came out of it. There was a benefit that came out of it, and that benefit was that it shows Klal Yisrael that the capacity of tshuva. It gives us a psicha, an opening to understand how great tshuva is. That no matter how far we may fall, and the Chet HaEgel, literally right after Matan Torah, is about as far as a Jew can fall. No matter how far we may fall, Hashem is makabel our tshuva. We learn this from the Chet HaEgel. And so, even though there was a negative element to the story, there was a positive element to the story. And in fact, this is perhaps the ultimate kavanah behind the story of the Chet HaEgel. That why did Hashem allow it to happen and enable it to happen? This was in order to teach Klal Yisrael tshuva. But who showed that generation the power to be able to choose? How did they know? They didn't have the Chet HaEgel to learn from. How did that generation know the power of tshuva? From Aaron HaKohen. From the fact that Aaron HaKohen had a part in the Chet HaEgel, and through clearly he had regret. We see it openly when Moshe Rabbeinu comes back, even though all of his intentions were positive. He had regret. And Hashem not only accepts his tshuva, makes him the Kohen Gadol. So it teaches us something so powerful. And this perhaps is why the Navi in Malachi describes Aaron HaKohen as Harabim Heshiv Ma'avim, that he brought many people back from sin. He empowered many people to do tshuva. This is how Malachi, the Navi Malachi, describes Aaron HaKohen as Rabim Heshiv Ma'avim, that he returned to men. Where do we see Aaron HaKohen was Rabim Heshiv Ma'avim? Where do we see anywhere in the Torah that Aaron HaKohen brought people back from sin? We don't see it anywhere. This is what Malachi is talking about. Because as we've spoken about in previous shiur, this is one of the themes I've spoken about many times, that as much as a teacher or a rabbi or a parent can lecture their students or their children about concepts in Yiddishkeit and morality and whatever it may be, ultimately a teacher or a rabbi or a parent's greatest example is the way they live their life, is how their children and their talmidim see they live. A rabbi's greatest sermon is not his oratory brilliance from the pulpit. It's the way the rabbi lives his life. And same thing with a parent, same thing with any teacher. Because that's truly how people learn. When we think about the people who've inspired us in our lifetimes, our parents, our grandparents, a rabbi, whoever it may be, it very rarely has anything to do with their lectures. It's rather the way that we see that they live. And so Hashem wanted to give Klal Yisrael a living example. If Aaron had no cheluk in the Chet HaEgel, and Aaron would only lecture Klal Yisrael about tshuva, it wouldn't hit in the same place. It wouldn't be received in the same way. But when they saw that Aaron himself was part of the Chet HaEgel, not just a big part of the Chet HaEgel, and he became the Kohen Gadol, from that story, this generation learned the power of tshuva. So this is what it means. B'makom shabali tshuva emdim. The Gemara in Brachas, b'makom shabali tshuva emdim. Afilu tzaddikim gemorim in yechelim la'amid ba. In a place that a bal tshuva stands, even the greatest tzaddik cannot stand there. What does this mean? How could this be? How could a bal tshuva reach a place, a makom, that a tzaddik gomer cannot reach? How is that possible? A tzaddik gomer who never tasted sin cannot reach a spiritual level that a bal tshuva, somebody who did engage in sin and had regret and did tshuva, they can reach a spiritual place that a great tzaddik cannot. What does the Gemara mean? This is exactly what the Gemara means. When it comes to inspiring others to do tshuva, there's a certain moral credibility that a bal tshuva has that a tzaddik does not have. As much as a tzaddik could speak about tshuva and speak about returning from sin, and speak about leading a negative lifestyle and becoming more religious or more connected to Hashem, whatever it may be, as much as a tzaddik could lecture that. But the tzaddik didn't live that. But a Baal Tshuva who lived that life, who was connected to the opposite of godliness, who turned themselves around and connected themselves to Hashem, has a certain credibility, street cred, if you will. And this is what it means, b'makom shabali tshuva omdim. And perhaps this is why what Pirkei Avos says about Aaron, what gave Aaron HaKohen the capacity to be mekarven l'Torah, to Heshiv Rabbim Ma'avain, to bring so many people back, to bring so many people closer to Torah. It's this exact story, the fact that he was part of the Chet HaEgel and transformed to become the Kohen Gadol. Aaron taught us about tshuva. And so this was Korach's mistake. This is exactly who Hashem wanted to be our leaders. The whole story of Korach is Korach's misunderstanding of the power of Bali Tshuva over tzaddikim in this sense. And that's why, as Rashi says, what does Korach say to Moshe? To question Moshe. A talis shekula tchelis. A talis that's all tchelis. That's all filled with the blue dye. Does it need tzitzis or not? Why should it need one single thread of tchelis? And Korach saying a bias moli svarim, a house that's filled with sifrei Torah. Does it need a mezuzah on the door? It's filled with every parsha in the Torah. What is 2 parshas in the mezuzah going to help? The bias is already filled with every parsha in the Torah. And Moshe Rabbeinu says, no, the talis does need tzitzis. The bias moli svarim does need a mezuzah. What's the underlying meaning behind this dispute with Korach and Moshe, with the talis and the bias moli svarim and the mezuzah? The tzaddik, the talis shekule techelis. Techelis is the color that is the royal blue. That when we look at the royal blue, we're reminded of the ocean, which reminds us of the sky, which reminds us of the kisei hakavod. The talis shekule techelis represents tzaddikim. The tzitzis are attached from the outside. The mezuzah is attached to the outside of the house. The mezuzah and the tzitzis represent the Baal Tshuva. They're attaching themselves to the tzaddikim. They're attaching themselves to the bias moli svarim. So what Korach is saying is the talis shekula tchelis. If we have tzaddikim as our leaders, do we need bali tshuva? Do we need the one string of tchelis from the outside? Do we need the mezuzah from the outside attaching itself? If we have a bias moli svarim, if we have a house full of tzaddikim, do we need the bali tshuva to be in leadership? If we're able to choose from tzaddikim to be the leaders, why are you choosing Aaron HaKohen? Choose a tzaddik to be the leader. And this was Korach's mistake. And this is what Moshe says, yes, we need the mezuzah. The bias moli svarim needs the mezuzah. The talis filled with tchelis needs the tzitzis. We need the bali tshuva because the bali tshuva have the capacity to bring people back in a way that a tzaddik doesn't. So when we understand it that way, we understand that Korach had beautiful kavanah. Korach ve'edasei had beautiful kavanah. Their kavanah was Klal Yisrael should be led by tzaddikim, by those who are completely attached to Hashem. But this wasn't Hashem's ratzon. This wasn't Hashem's desire for the reason we said, because of the place that Bali Tshuva have. But perhaps this explains why. And ultimately, to create machlekes, which we'll talk about in a second, even with great intentions, is such an egregious, is such a severe sin that not only did Korach ve'edasei die from this, but Hashem created a punishment that we've never seen before or after. The earth opens up to tell us this, and this teaches us the severity of machlekes, even when the intentions are good. But this also perhaps explains why. And again, it's part of the mixed messaging of this story that when they were ultimately tested to see who Hashem would choose, would Hashem choose the tzaddikim or would Hashem choose Aaron HaKohen? All of their fire pans that Hashem didn't choose, the fire pans of the tzaddikim that they offered keteris on, what did Hashem say to do with those fire pans? He said to line the mizbeach with them. They became the lining of the mizbeach. I mean, how could that be? If these were just Rishoyim battling against, if these were just Stam, the Dasan and Aviram type of Rishoyim, just battling against Moshe Rabbeinu, why would we line the Mizbeach with them? Lining the Mizbeach means that every korban that Klal Yisrael would bring would be brought upon those machtos, that lining of the Mizbeach. So clearly, these were tzaddikim, and they had incredible, beautiful L'Shem Shemayim intentions. That Klal Yisrael should be led by tzaddikim. But what Moshe Rabbeinu understood, what Hashem's ratzon was they should be led by Bali Tshuva, by Aaron HaKohen, in order to teach Klal Yisrael the power of Tshuva. But if that's the case, so that on that all makes sense. But then how do we understand Pirkei Avos? That Korach ve'idase is an example of a machlekes that she'enu l'shem shemayim. That seems to put the whole thing in a negative, right? As Pirkei Avos says, what's an example of machlekes l'shem shemayim, Hillel and Shammai? Machlekes she'enu l'shem shemayim, Korach ve'idase. But based upon our previous explanation, it seems to be extremely l'shem shemayim. They had the most beautiful intentions. They were great tzaddikim. So on one hand, they were great tzaddikim with beautiful intentions, and hence the Mizbeach is lined with their fire pans, which means that all the korbanos that Klal Yisrael would in the future bring are brought upon those fire pans. But on the other hand, Hashem created a hole in the ground and swallowed them all up. So again, how do we understand? So there's a fascinating Ramban on our Parsha, and the Ramban says that when HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, "He badlu mateicha eda hazais v'kala esim karega," Hashem tells Moshe Rabbeinu, "Separate yourself from this eda. I'm going to destroy them all." It wasn't just talking about Korach ve'idase. It was talking about all the Jews, the vast majority of Klal Yisrael, who sat on the sidelines as well. That Hashem was going to destroy them all. But why? If their intent was l'shem shemayim, and as the Yismach Moshe said, it was so hard to tell. Then now we can understand the Yismach Moshe, who said it was so hard to tell who was right. All the spiritual leaders followed Korach. Korach was a tremendous tzaddik, a tremendous spiritual giant. It wasn't so simple. Now we understand, based upon how we explained, why the Yismach Moshe said that. And why it wasn't so easy to understand. But if that's the case, then why did Hashem create this hole in the ground, swallow them all up? Why is Pirkei Avos say it's not l'shem shemayim? So says the Ramban. And why would the Ramban says Hashem akala esim karega doesn't only refer to the 250 men, it refers to everybody who sat on the sidelines. So the Mor Anayim, the Chernobyl Rebbe, gives a beautiful explanation of the severity of machlekes, even when the intentions are positive, like here. And he says that we know the famous Maimer Chazal that Yisrael v'Raisa v'Kuchabrichu Kulichad, that Hashem, the Torah, and the Jewish people are all one. And what this means is that every single Jew is connected to a specific letter in the Sefer Torah. Our neshama is connected to a letter in the Sefer Torah. And it is from that ois in the Torah that all of our hashpah, all of our brachas, all of our chayas comes to us via that our ois in the Torah. And when we sin, we make a pagam, we make a stain, we damage the letter, which in turn damages the hashpah, damages the flow of brachas. But when we rectify the sin, it's like rectifying the letter, and our flow comes back. But what if when we engage in machlekes, when we create division amongst the Jewish people, we remove our letter from the rest of the words, from the rest of the Torah. When a letter is removed from the rest of the Torah, that letter is, and the entire Torah becomes pasul. So every Jew who is connected to that machlekes, even if their intentions were positive, were removing their letter from the Sefer Torah. Hence, akala esim karecha. They're removing their source of hashpah, their source of life force, their source of brachas, their source of chayis. They're removing. He says this is the severity of machlekes. He says, and this is why, parenthetically, this is so beautiful, which I've never thought of this before. I mean, it's the famous question. I never thought of this answer before. That famous question when it comes to Simchas Torah is, why is Simchas Torah in the end of Tishrei? It's totally out of place. What does Simchas Torah have to do with Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Sukkot? L'chera, Simchas Torah should come Shavuos time, right? It should come around Shavuos time. Kabbalah Torah and Simchas Torah, right? We receive the Torah, and that's when we receive the Torah, and this is when we conclude the Torah. That would make much more sense. What place does Simchas Torah have to Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Sukkot? And says the Ma'oranayim, the joy of Simchas Torah, the real joy of Simchas Torah, because we know Simchas Torah is one of our greatest, joyous, happiest Yomim Tovim. But why? What's the tremendous joy of Simchas Torah? Why? We finish the Torah, okay, that's wonderful, that's beautiful, but it's deeper than that. You see, Simchas Torah comes after the tshuva of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur is about tshuva. And then what is Sukkot about? Sukkot is about simcha, zman simchasenu, but it's about achdus, right? The Daled Minim represent the 4 different kind of Jews, and what do? We bind them together, and we all together sit under the sukkah. The sukkah embraces all the Jews as one. So after the tshuva of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur and the achdus of Sukkot, everybody's letter that may have been damaged or may have been removed from the Torah is replaced back because we've done tshuva. We've come together as one. So the Torah is whole again. On Simchas Torah, everybody's letter is brought back to the Torah. So now the Torah is whole again. This is the joy of Simchas Torah. This is the power of Simchas Torah. The Torah is whole again. The hashpah, the flow of brachas, everything is there, says the Ma'oranayim. So in the story of Korach, when everybody's sitting on the sidelines, Korach's intention was wonderful. He had beautiful, great, righteous intention. And those sitting on the sidelines weren't sure what to do. But this is the severity of machlekes. And this is what the Parshas of Korach is teaching us. To the contrary, not only was Korach not a bad guy, Korach was a great tzaddik. But he had one fatal flaw. And that was, he was so convinced that his argument was correct, that his intentions were pure, that he was willing to be involved in machlekes and seduce others to be involved in the machlekes. And so here is what the Torah is telling us: even when you're a great tzaddik, and even when your intentions are pure, when you convince others to be involved in machlekes, when you bring about machlekes, you are separating your letter from the Torah. You're separating their letter from the Torah. You're removing the life force of Klal Yisrael. And for that, it's so severe. Notwithstanding the great tzaddik that Korach was, that needed a brand new punishment, the earth opening up, so that we should understand how severe it was. And this is what Pirkei Avos means. That a machlekes l'shem shemayim is seifa lihiskayim. What does it mean? Seifa lihiskayim. A machlekes that's l'shem shemayim will endure. Why would we want any machlekes to endure? What does it mean that the machlekes will endure? What it means is as follows: that Hillel and Shammai, as much as they battled and they fought when it came to concepts of Torah and halacha, They had an intrinsic love and respect for one another, tremendous love and respect for one another, an honor for one another. And so when that machlekes was over, when they left the base medrash, they embraced, they loved one another, they respected one another. Seifa means the ava between them in the end, even after the machlekes is over, will be liskayim, where the ava will endure. In the end, Seifa, in the end, the ava will be niskayim, the ava will endure between them. That's a machlekes l'shem shemayim. It's a machlekes. They're fighting about concepts in Torah. If you ever walk into a base medrash and you ever see two people arguing about a piece of Talmud, they look like they're battling and they're fighting. But then they leave the base medrash. They embrace one another. Because it's not a real fight. It's not a real machlekes. That's what it means, l'shem shemayim. They're battling for what they understand the halacha to be. And the proof that it's l'shem shemayim. L'shem shemayim doesn't mean good intention. L'shem shemayim means it's for the sake of Hashem. The proof that it's for the sake of Hashem is that they love each other. There's an underlying love between them. When they close the Talmud, they love one another. They embrace one another. You want to know what a machlekes she'einu l'shem shemayim means? It doesn't mean it's not for the sake of Hashem. Korach was also battling for the sake of Hashem. It's ein sefer liskayim. Is if there's bad feelings, there's no ava. In the end, the ava is in this kayim. That's what it means, ein sefer liskayim. In the end, the ava is not there. There's negative feelings there. There's bad feelings there. Even though the intention was good. But if you create a machlekes that brings division and bitterness to people, that there's no ava at the end, ein sefer liskayim, that's not l'shem shemayim. No matter how wonderful your intentions are. The vast majority of people involved in machlekes think their intentions are correct. Most people think about themselves. There's very few Dasan and Aviram type Jews in the world who fight just for the sake of fighting. Everybody thinks their shita is right, their intention is right, their kavanah is right. How do we know if it's l'shem shemayim or not? If it's sefer liskayim or ein sefer. If there's ava between the people or there's bitterness between the people. And if there's bitterness, division and bitterness means you're removing your ace from the Sefer Torah, means you're taking away the chayas from Klal Yisrael. This is the lesson of Korach v'Yidasai. This is the lesson of our Parsha. The lesson of the power of tshuva and the lesson of the power of achdus. And perhaps this is why Parshas Korach always falls out besmichas to the Lubavitcher Rebbe's yahrzeit. Because the Lubavitcher Rebbe had many themes of his leadership, many, many themes. But perhaps two of the greatest themes of the Rebbe's leadership was the unity of Klal Yisrael, the achdus of the Jewish people. The Rebbe did not see differentiation between Jews. And the biggest proof of that is if you would ever go to Dollars by the Rebbe, you would see not just Hasidim there, not just Lubavitchers there. It was a subsection of Klal Yisrael. And you could see it today. Go to the oil today, anytime. Walk into the oil. And who do you see? You see Hasidim. You see Hasidim who are non-Lubavitchers. You see Lubavitcher Hasidim. You see Orthodox Jews. You see modern Orthodox. You see not yet religious Jews. You see the entire Klal Yisrael goes to the Rebbe. When the Rebbe was alive, Beguf Gashmi, by Dollars, you saw the... And now, by the oil. The Rebbe was the ultimate uniter of the Jewish people. And did not believe in labels, Orthodox, Reform, Conservative. The Rebbe spoke many times. There is no label. A Jew is a Jew is a Jew. And the Rebbe was makabel and accepted and received and gave blessings and guided every Jew, all of Klal Yisrael. There's a reason why other Rebbes are the Satmar Rebbe, the Visions Rebbe, the Ger Rebbe. The Rebbe was the Rebbe. Because he was the Rebbe of not just his group. He was the Rebbe of Klal Yisrael. He saw and he battled his entire life for the unity and the achdus of Klal Yisrael. And so, and if there is a Jew in the history of the Jewish people who brought more people back to Yiddishkeit than the Lubavitcher Rebbe, I don't know. I don't think so. The Rebbe, through his thousands of emissaries all over the world, the Rebbe had one mission: to bring every Jew back to Yiddishkeit. Because ultimately, and why? What was the underlying reason there? Because of the achdus of Klal Yisrael. Their two are interconnected. The achdus and the desire to bring every Jew back through tshuva, the power of tshuva and the power of achdus are together, are woven together. There's a reason why the Rebbe sent emissaries all over the world to bring people back. It's because of the understanding that if one Jew is missing, if one Jew is lacking, if one Jew's letter is separate from the Torah, then we are all lacking because we're all one body. We're all interconnected. It doesn't matter what our minhagim is or what our minhagim are, the way that we wear our hats, the type of yarmulkes we wear. None of that matters in terms of the achdus and unity of our nation. And so this is the underlying message of the Parsha of Korach, the power of tshuva, the toxicity of creating machlekes, even when you feel you're right and your kavanah is right, your intention is right. In the end, will the love remain or will it create bitterness and division? That's the barometer. That's what Korach teaches us. No matter how great of a tzaddik you may be, no matter how wonderful your intentions are, when you create division in Klal Yisrael, that itself is worthy of a brand new punishment in Torah being swallowed up, no matter how righteous you may be. But we also see from this story, that those sitting on the sidelines, according to the Ramban, were just as guilty. That when we see machlekes and division happening, that our job is not to sit on the sidelines. That our job is to ensure that we do whatever we can to end the machlekes, to end the division. This is the story. So on one hand, Korach was not just a good guy, an incredible tzaddik, but on the other hand, Korach had some incredible fatal flaws that we could learn from today. So Amir Hashem, every one of us will learn the message of Parshas Korach. And especially now, and especially with everything Klal Yisrael is going through, and now as we approach the Lubavitch Rebbe's yahrzeit on this Sunday, if the one gift that we can give to the Rebbe on his yahrzeit is to dedicate ourselves to bringing people back to Yiddishkeit, to Heishiv Rabim Mi'avin, as Malachi, the Navi Malachi describes Aaron HaKayin, for every one of us to embody that, the Achdus, the unity of Klal Yisrael, to come together in unity, which is what our nation needs now. And Amir Tzashem, if we learn from the message of Parshas Korach, we will bring that which the Rebbe fought his entire life for, because this is ultimately the one recipe to Mashiach is Heishiv Rabim Me'avin and Achdus Yisrael. Tshuva and Achdus are the two things that will bring our nation Geula. These are the lessons of Parshas Korach. And Mir Hashem, we all of us will bring others back. We'll bring ourselves back. We'll stress and magnify the Achdus amongst ourselves in our sphere of influence. And Amir Hashem, bring us and bring the entire world to the coming Mashiach Tzidkenu. B'mheir v'yameinu amen. Okay, let us say Tehillim now for the IDF and for our hostages and for all of Klal Yisrael. May they be safe and secure in Eretz Yisrael, wherever they may be. So let's just finish off with Tehillim, Perek 121, Kuf Chaf Aleph. Shir l'maloi seseinai harri miyayin yavoi ezri mimarine eis shemayim v'yaretz ayitin l'raglecha yanim shemrecha hinil yanim li'ishin shem Yisrael Adonai Shem Rachel Nitzilcha Yad Yaminecha Yema Meshemesh Leikecha V'Reich B'Layla Adonai Yishmarcha Mikara Yishmar Es Nafshecha Adonai Yishmar Tzesel V'Yecha Mi'ata V'Yad Olam. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a wonderful week, and Amir Tzashem, we'll see everybody next week, next Tuesday. Take care, everybody. Have a wonderful week. Maybe only hear the Suras Tevis from Eretz Yisrael, from Klal Yisrael, and ultimately the ultimate Basur Tevis, the coming Mashiach. Take care, everybody. Have a wonderful week.
So when you say